How does a glamorous reality TV couple, once known for their lavish lifestyle and witty on-screen banter, end up trading designer clothes and luxury cars for prison uniforms? What drove Todd and Julie Chrisley, stars of Chrisley Knows Best, to orchestrate elaborate financial schemes behind the scenes? Was it sheer greed, pressure to maintain appearances, or something deeper rooted in the image they had built for millions of viewers? How did federal investigators uncover years of bank fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion that the Chrisleys fought so hard to conceal? And why did a jury in 2022 find them guilty, sentencing Todd to 12 years and Julie to 7, despite their insistence on innocence? What toll did the prison terms take on their family, their reputation, and their empire of reality television fame? And perhaps the most shocking twist of all, what led to their full presidential pardon in May 2025, erasing their prison terms just as their downfall seemed permanent? Were Todd and Julie victims of a broken system, or masterminds who manipulated it until justice caught up with them? And what does their story reveal about fame, fortune, and the cost of keeping up appearances at all costs? They look like the perfect family. Southern charm, designer clothes, sprawling mansions, and a hit reality television show watched by millions across America. Todd and Julie Chrisley sold us the image of perfection, a family that laughed together, lived in luxury, and knew how to enjoy the finer things in life. But behind the glossy magazine covers and the cameras of Chrisley Knows Best, there was a darker story, one built not on success, but on deception. To their fans, they were aspirational, the very definition of wealth, glamour, and family values. But prosecutors would later describe them very differently, as con artists who built their empire on fraud, forgery, and tax evasion. A husband and wife who convinced banks to hand over millions using fabricated documents, who dodged the IRS while flaunting their lavish spending on national television, and who eventually faced the most humiliating fall from grace imaginable, prison. In 2022, their double life came crashing down. Todd Chrisley, once the confident patriarch who bragged about controlling everything in his world, was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His wife Julie, the elegant mother and partner by his side, was sentenced to 7. The very people who once ruled over the carefully curated world of reality television now found themselves stripped of their freedom, reduced to numbers in the federal system. But the story doesn't end there, because in May of 2025, in a twist few could have predicted, Todd and Julie Chrisley, convicted felons who had already begun serving their lengthy prison terms, were suddenly granted a full pardon, a shocking decision that left America divided. Some cheered for their release, believing they had been unfairly targeted. Others were outraged, calling it an insult to justice and a reminder that wealth and fame can bend the rules. So how did it come to this? How did Todd and Julie Chrisley, the golden couple of reality TV, adored by fans and envied by critics, fall so spectacularly, only to rise again in freedom through one of the most controversial presidential pardons in recent memory? What secrets were buried behind the walls of their luxury homes? What role did fame, ego, and power play in their downfall? And what really happened inside that courtroom, where every detail of their private lives was dragged into the light? This is not just the story of a wealthy couple who broke the law. It is a cautionary tale of fame, greed, and the relentless pursuit of image at all costs. Tonight, we peel back the curtain on the Chrisleys, from their early beginnings, to their meteoric rise on reality television, to the fraud scheme that unraveled it all, and the shocking pardon that brought them back into the spotlight. This is the untold story of Todd and Julie Chrisley, and it begins right now. Before they were reality TV stars, before the courtrooms and the headlines, Todd and Julie Chrisley were simply two people chasing the American dream. To understand how their story unraveled, we must first understand where it all began. Todd Chrisley was born in 1969 in Georgia, a Southern boy with big ambitions. From an early age, Todd showed a sharp mind for business, a love for appearances, and a determination to never settle for less than the best. Friends from his youth recall a young man who was charming, meticulous, and fiercely ambitious, a man who hated the idea of being ordinary. As Todd grew older, his focus turned to real estate. He saw property not just as business, but as a stage, a way to create the kind of glamorous lifestyle he always dreamed of. By his 20s, Todd was already climbing the real estate ladder, presenting himself as a man of wealth and taste. But beneath that success, money was always tight. Deals were risky, loans were heavy, and yet Todd's obsession with the image of success meant he could never admit weakness. It was around this time that Todd met Julie Hughes. Julie had grown up in South Carolina, in a close-knit family, and was seen by many as the picture of Southern grace. Her father, a Baptist minister, instilled in her strong values and an image of stability. But when Julie met Todd, her life took on an entirely new trajectory. Together, they became a power couple in their own right. Todd, with his drive and flair for business, and Julie, with her supportive nature and natural charm. Their relationship was more than romance. It was the beginning of a brand. By the early 2000s, the Chrisleys were living a life many envied. Todd was presenting himself as a self-made millionaire, a real estate mogul with a taste for designer clothes and luxury cars. Julie was the devoted wife and mother, raising their children with elegance and care. But behind those closed mansion doors, financial problems never truly went away. The Chrisleys were spending far more than they made, borrowing against the future to fund the present. Their family life looked picture-perfect, but in reality, cracks were already forming in the foundation. It was Todd's gift for image, however, that opened an entirely new door. By 2014, the Chrisleys landed their own reality show, Chrisley Knows Best. The series promised America a peek into the lives of the wealthy Southern family, who seemed to have it all. Viewers were drawn to Todd's sharp wit, Julie's warmth, and the hilarious family dynamics. What no one knew, watching the laughter and the arguments unfold on screen, was that the Chrisleys' picture-perfect world was already built on financial lies. Fame was about to magnify not only their lifestyle, but also the secrets they desperately tried to keep hidden. As America fell in love with the Chrisleys' version of family life, federal investigators were quietly building a case. The cameras captured laughter and luxury, but behind the scenes, prosecutors claimed that every laugh, every designer outfit, and every luxury home was funded by lies. The question is, how long could the Chrisleys keep up the illusion before everything came crashing down? In 2014, Chrisley Knows Best premiered on the USA Network, and almost overnight, Todd and Julie Chrisley became household names. The show promised a window into the daily lives of a wealthy Southern family, complete with laughter, lessons, and plenty of drama. Audiences couldn't get enough. Todd's sharp tongue and obsession with appearances made for must-see television, while Julie balanced his flamboyance with her calm, steady presence. Together, they presented the perfect on-screen partnership, funny, loving, and oh so glamorous. The Chrisleys weren't just reality TV stars. They were marketed as America's modern, wealthy Southern family, a kind of real-life sitcom that audiences could laugh along with. Todd played the perfectionist father, obsessed with control and luxury, while Julie embodied the picture of Southern grace and motherhood. Their children became characters in their own right, each with quirks and storylines that endeared them to fans. In an era filled with dark scandals and divisive politics, Chrisley Knows Best offered something comforting, a family that seemed both outrageous and relatable. But make no mistake, what audiences were really drawn to was the wealth. The show flaunted sprawling mansions, designer wardrobes, luxury cars, and vacations most viewers could only dream of. Todd never missed a chance to remind the cameras that he lived a life of sophistication and control. He boasted about spending thousands on clothes, thousands more on his children, and sparing no expense on maintaining an image of success. In the world of reality television, appearances were everything, and for the Chrisleys, appearances came at any cost. As the show grew in popularity, so too did the Chrisleys brand. They launched podcasts, gave interviews, and secured endorsement deals. Fans began to idolize their lifestyle, the perfect blend of Southern tradition and modern extravagance. But while their public star was rising higher than ever, their private finances were sinking deeper into chaos. Because what television never showed was the mountain of debt, the risky loans, and the fraudulent documents that prosecutors would later claim kept the Chrisley empire afloat. Todd often boasted that he had everything under control. He claimed to monitor his children's text messages, control the family's spending, and even plan their every move. But the truth was far different. In reality, the more the cameras captured their lavish lives, the more pressure there was to keep up appearances. And that pressure led the Chrisleys further down a path that would eventually catch the attention of federal investigators. The irony was undeniable. The very show that made the Chrisleys famous, that cemented them as reality TV royalty, also exposed the illusion they worked so hard to maintain. Millions tuned in to watch a family that seemed to have it all. But in time, investigators would argue that the wealth on display wasn't just exaggerated, it was stolen. As the Chrisleys smiled for the cameras, federal agents were quietly digging into their finances. The very lifestyle that drew millions of viewers was about to draw the scrutiny of prosecutors. And soon, the curtain would be pulled back on what investigators called one of the boldest fraud schemes ever carried out by reality television stars. For years, Todd and Julie Chrisley projected wealth on television screens across America. But behind closed doors, whispers began to spread. Former employees, business partners, and even friends claimed that not everything added up. Their homes were lavish, their spending outrageous, but their actual income, when compared to what they flaunted, didn't make sense. And in time, those whispers reached the ears of federal investigators. According to prosecutors, the scheme was both bold and calculated. Investigators alleged that Todd and Julie conspired with a trusted business associate to falsify documents, inflating their net worth in order to secure more than $30 million in fraudulent bank loans. They presented banks with fake financial statements, claiming they had millions more than they really did. These loans were then used to fund their extravagant lifestyle, private jets, designer clothes, and luxury real estate. Even more shocking was what prosecutors claimed happened after the loans. Instead of responsibly managing these funds, the Chrisleys allegedly used new loans to pay off old debts, a cycle that investigators would later describe as a house of cards, destined to collapse. And while they were juggling debt behind the scenes on television, they were laughing, shopping, and telling America they had everything under control. Then came the tax evasion allegations. Prosecutors accused the Chrisleys of hiding millions in income from the IRS, funneling money through shell companies, and dodging payments year after year. In fact, Todd's own accountant later testified that the family simply refused to pay what they owed. For a couple who boasted about wealth and discipline, the truth revealed something very different. A family willing to cheat the system while America watched from their living rooms. As investigators dug deeper, their case grew stronger. By 2019, Todd and Julie Chrisley were indicted on multiple federal charges, including bank fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion. The glamorous image they had spent years cultivating was now replaced with mugshots, headlines, and the looming threat of decades behind bars. For their fans, the news was shocking. For investigators, it was confirmation that the illusion had finally collapsed. But for the Chrisleys, the fight was only just beginning. They denied all charges, insisting they were victims of a vengeful former employee who turned them in to save himself. Todd took to social media, declaring their innocence, and Julie, ever composed, stood by his side. To their supporters, it looked like a witch hunt. To prosecutors, it was an open and shut case of fraud. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic reality TV meets courtroom sagas in recent memory. The Chrisleys had spent years performing for the cameras, but this time, the stage would be a federal courtroom, and the audience would be 12 jurors deciding their fate. The question now was simple. Would America's picture-perfect family be exposed as criminals, or would they find a way to charm the jury, just as they had charmed millions of viewers at home? The trial of Todd and Julie Chrisley began in May of 2022, inside a federal courtroom in Atlanta, Georgia. Outside, Fans gathered to catch a glimpse of the reality TV stars who once brought them laughter every week. But inside, the mood was very different. This was not a set. There were no retakes. And for the first time, the Chrisleys' glamorous image would be stripped away, replaced with cold, hard evidence. The prosecution wasted no time painting the Chrisleys as masterminds of a years-long fraud scheme. Jurors were shown falsified bank documents, forged signatures, and spreadsheets that prosecutors said were created to trick lenders into believing the couple was far wealthier than they really were. They called it deliberate, calculated, and driven by greed. Todd, they argued, would stop at nothing to maintain the image of perfection, even if it meant breaking the law. But the defense had their own story. Todd and Julie's attorneys argued that the real culprit was a former employee, their ex-business partner, Mark Braddock. Braddock, once a close associate of Todd's, testified against them in exchange for immunity. He told jurors that he and Todd had conspired together to defraud banks, creating fake documents and hiding income. The defense countered. Braddock was lying to save himself, motivated by revenge against Todd. Who was telling the truth? That decision would rest with the jury. Throughout the trial, Todd's personality, the same charisma that made him a television star, was on full display. He sat upright, well-dressed, whispering to his attorneys and shaking his head at testimony. Julie, in contrast, appeared subdued, her calm demeanor hiding the storm beneath. Supporters watched closely, convinced their idols were being targeted. Critics saw two celebrities trying to act their way out of justice. The testimony was explosive. Braddock alleged that he helped falsify documents, fabricate credit reports, and even impersonate Todd on calls with banks. Prosecutors introduced emails and text messages as evidence, tying the Chrisleys directly to the scheme. It was a rare glimpse into the hidden world behind the luxury, and for many in the courtroom, the contrast between the reality show image and the reality itself could not have been sharper. As the days went on, the trial became not just about fraud, but about identity. Who were Todd and Julie Chrisley really? Were they the loving, disciplined parents America had watched for nearly a decade? Or were they, as prosecutors claimed, performers in an elaborate act of deception, willing to lie, cheat, and steal to maintain the illusion of success? Finally, after weeks of testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. Hours passed, then a day, then another. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, waiting for the verdict that would determine the fate of reality TV's golden couple. And when the jury finally returned, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The verdict was read aloud: guilty. Guilty of bank fraud. Guilty of wire fraud. Guilty of tax evasion. For Todd and Julie Chrisley, the illusion had finally shattered. The couple who once told America they had it all under control now faced years, more than a decade, behind bars. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Some wept. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The Chrisleys themselves sat frozen, their faces pale, their future uncertain. By November of 2022, sentencing day arrived. Todd Chrisley was handed 12 years in federal prison. Julie Chrisley was sentenced to 7. Their attorney vowed to appeal, but the message from the court was clear. Fame does not place you above the law. For the Chrisleys, who once lived in glittering mansions, their new reality would be concrete walls, orange uniforms, and the crushing weight of time. But even in prison, the Chrisley saga was far from over, because while Todd and Julie began serving their sentences, their children were left to pick up the pieces, and their lawyers began the long, uphill battle of appeals. The Chrisleys' fight was not finished, and no one could have predicted the shocking twist that was still to come. When the verdict turned to reality, life for Todd and Julie Chrisley changed overnight. No longer were they the stars of a reality television empire. No longer were they admired as the perfectly coiffed, sharp-tongued faces of Southern wealth. Instead, they became federal inmates, stripped of the luxuries that once defined them. Todd reported to serve his sentence at a federal prison in Pensacola, Florida. Julie began hers in Lexington, Kentucky. For the first time in decades, the Chrisley family, once inseparable, always under the same glamorous roof, was split apart by steel bars and state lines. The couple who made a living selling the idea of family unity now faced their longest separation. For their children, the burden was crushing. Savannah and Chase, the eldest, suddenly carried the weight of guardianship, not only for themselves but for their younger siblings. Grayson, still in his teens, and Chloe, their adopted daughter, struggled with the absence of their parents. At just the age when children need stability most, they were thrust into a storm. The Chrisleys' TV empire collapsed. Chrisley Knows Best was canceled, reruns pulled, sponsorships cut. Fans who once adored the family were now divided. Some wrote letters of support, others expressed betrayal. Online, the narrative was brutal: memes, ridicule, and endless debates about whether justice had been served or whether the Chrisleys were victims of a system determined to make an example of them. Inside prison walls, Todd and Julie's lives could not have been more different from what viewers saw on television. Todd, once dressed in tailored suits, was now in a khaki uniform, working menial prison jobs. Julie, who prided herself on hospitality and grace, was reduced to strict schedules, shared facilities, and the suffocating monotony of incarceration. Both described prison as dehumanizing, a stark contrast to the image of control they had long cultivated. But what stood out most was their resilience. Todd used prison phone calls to encourage his children, telling them to stand strong and keep the family together. Julie leaned on her faith, writing letters that her children later described as lifelines. Despite everything, they tried to maintain the same message they had always preached: family first, no matter the circumstances. But beyond the walls, the pressure mounted. Bills piled up. Legal fees grew. The Chrisleys' lavish lifestyle had evaporated, replaced by survival. Every prison visit meant security checks, long waits, and heartbreaking goodbyes. For Savannah and Chase, it was a crash course in adulthood. They had to protect their younger siblings while keeping hope alive that one day their parents might come home sooner than expected. Yet even as the family struggled, their legal team was already at work. Appeals were filed, petitions drafted, arguments made that the sentencing was excessive, that evidence had been mishandled. For every setback, the Chrisleys' attorneys promised one thing: this fight wasn't over. For most families, the story would have ended there: a conviction, a prison sentence, and a quiet fade into obscurity. But for Todd and Julie Chrisley, fate had one more shocking twist to deliver. Because in 2025, something happened that no one could have predicted, and it would change everything. By early 2025, Todd and Julie Chrisley had been behind bars for nearly 2 years. Their appeals had failed. Their lives as they once knew them were gone. And for most Americans, the Chrisley saga had become just another faded headline. But deep in Washington, D.C., a decision was being weighed, one that would reignite their story and shock the nation. In May of 2025, the President of the United States issued a sweeping list of pardons. Buried within the names was one entry that no one expected: Todd and Julie Chrisley. In an instant, the couple who had once been branded as criminals, convicted fraudsters, were now free. A federal pardon had erased their sentences and given them a second chance. The news spread like wildfire. Supporters cheered, saying the punishment had always been too harsh. Critics were outraged, accusing the administration of favoritism toward celebrities. Cable news ran endless debates. Talk radio lit up with callers demanding answers. Why the Chrisleys? Why now? The White House gave no detailed explanation, only citing clemency in the interest of justice. For the Chrisley children, the pardon was nothing short of a miracle. Savannah and Chase were the first to announce it online, their voices cracking with emotion. Grayson and Chloe would finally have their parents back. For a family that had been fractured, hope suddenly returned. Tears of relief turned into plans for reunions. The nightmare, it seemed, was over. When Todd and Julie walked out of prison, they were not the same people who had gone in. Todd's once carefully styled hair was now grayer, his face marked with time. Julie appeared thinner, her eyes tired yet filled with determination. Reporters swarmed them, cameras flashing. But the couple kept their message simple. They were grateful, humbled, and ready to rebuild. The pardon didn't erase the pain of the past years. It didn't restore the lost television deals, the financial empire, or the trust of everyone they had once charmed. But it gave them something even more valuable: time. Time to spend with their children. Time to rebuild their lives. Time, perhaps, to write a new chapter in a story that had already defied belief. Yet the pardon raised questions that may never be answered. Did celebrity influence play a role? Was this a case of political strategy? Or did someone somewhere believe that Todd and Julie Chrisley truly deserved a second chance? Whatever the reason, the Chrisleys were free, and their story had shifted once again, from cautionary tale to one of redemption, controversy, and endless debate. How did America's picture-perfect family go from television stardom to federal prison and back to freedom through a presidential pardon? Was it justice served or justice denied? The story of Todd and Julie Chrisley is one of wealth, ambition, downfall, and redemption. But above all, it is a story that reminds us of one truth. In the world of fame and power, nothing is ever as perfect as it seems. Long before federal prosecutors and courtrooms, Todd and Julie Chrisley were the faces of a television empire built on charm, control, and comedy. Their show, Chrisley Knows Best, wasn't just a reality series. It was a window into what looked like the perfect Southern family. Week after week, millions tuned in to watch Todd deliver one-liners, Julie play the voice of reason, and their kids stumble through life's lessons under their father's watchful eye. But beneath the laughter, the designer clothes, and the gold-plated image was a deeper truth. The Chrisleys didn't just know best, they knew how to sell a lifestyle, a fantasy. One that hid the financial cracks already forming beneath the marble floors of their Nashville mansion. The question is, when you build a brand on perfection, how long can you keep the flaws from showing? When the guilty verdict hit the headlines, it wasn't just a court case, it was a cultural earthquake. Overnight, the Chrisleys became tabloid gold. Talk shows mocked them. Social media roasted them. But not everyone joined the pile-on. Their loyal fans, who had laughed and cried with them for nearly a decade, rushed to their defense, launching petitions, hashtags, and campaigns to free Todd and Julie. It was a nation divided. Were the Chrisleys criminals who finally got caught, or victims of a system that delights in tearing down the rich and famous? Behind the headlines, the story turned quieter and far more human. From inside prison walls, Todd and Julie sent letters, statements, and reflections that painted a very different picture than the glamorous one fans were used to. Julie spoke of her failing health and the harshness of life inside. Todd described clinging to his faith, searching for strength behind bars. And their children, they wrote of birthdays missed, holidays that felt empty, and the loneliness of seeing their parents only through glass partitions. These letters weren't just updates. They were confessions. Admissions that no matter how much money, fame, or influence you have, prison strips it all away. The Chrisley story isn't just about one family. It's about America's fascination with wealth, celebrity, and the fall from grace. They aren't the first stars to fall. Martha Stewart, Teresa Giudice. Even Hollywood power players have stood before judges accused of fraud, tax evasion, or worse. But why do these stories grip us so tightly? Maybe because they remind us that fame is fragile, that no matter how perfect the Instagram feed looks, no matter how glossy the reality TV edits appear, truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. And so the question remains, did justice truly serve its purpose? Or did the Chrisleys simply become another example of how America builds its idols, only to revel in their downfall? In the end, Todd and Julie Chrisley's story is more than a courtroom drama. It's a tale of ambition, image, and the thin line between success and scandal. They went from living in mansions, dressed in designer clothes, and watched by millions every week, to wearing prison uniforms and waiting for visiting hours. Their convictions shook not only their family, but also the millions of fans who thought they knew them best. And then, in 2025, came the twist no one could have predicted: a full presidential pardon. In a single stroke of a pen, their prison sentences were wiped away, their records cleared. Some cheered, saying justice had finally corrected itself. Others were outraged, claiming the powerful had once again escaped accountability. But beyond the debates, beyond the headlines and hashtags, one question lingers. What do the Chrisleys do next? Will they rebuild their empire, stepping back into the spotlight with a new chapter of redemption? Or will their names forever carry the weight of scandal, a reminder of how quickly the American dream can turn into a nightmare? The Chrisleys' journey forces us to confront something uncomfortable. We don't just love watching people rise. We love watching them fall. And when the fall is spectacular, when it's messy, when it exposes all the cracks we were never meant to see, we can't look away. So tonight, as the lights dim and the story fades, remember this: behind every glossy TV screen, every perfect Instagram post, every mansion, car, and diamond necklace, there might be secrets buried just out of sight. And the Chrisleys, America's once perfect family, learned that those secrets don't stay hidden forever. How did they go from reality TV royalty to federal prison, and back out again with a second chance? The answer is simple. They lived the American dream, until it became the American scandal. Before we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to thank you for staying with me through this story. Your time and support mean the world, and it's what keeps this channel alive. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts on the Chrisleys' rise, fall, and pardon. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into true crime and the hidden stories behind fame and power. Your engagement not only helps the channel grow, it helps bring more untold stories to light. So thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.